Welcome, everybody. This is an interview between two really good buddies. We spent a lot of time together, particularly in Steak and Shake on Hampton.
In
And
your
so
Valley.
we're going to talk today about some reminiscing with Crossroads. So, Dennis, I'd like to start with the Chronicle, the school newspaper, everything from how you put it together to when we, and that has to include me, shut the newspaper down
Yeah.
and
Well,
how it came
is it,
back.
the early incantation of the Chronicle was, it started really on Lindell. We had a mimeograph machine, and I was reading, I can't remember whose comment it was, said that we lived for the smell of the mimeograph, when it came off and the paper was still wet, you know.
Um, yeah, they used to call Carol's perfume Eau de Dido.
And that's
Yeah,
so true, though. It's so
right,
true because she
right.
loved the Ditto machine for sure.
She did. She did.
And people who are younger probably have no clue what we're talking about.
Exactly.
But it was you sort of made an image and then you put it on a drum, and then the drum rotated the paper through, and you made these copies, for lack of a better term, one at a time. But it put this sort of wet ink on there, and then that had sort of alcohol smell to it that would permeate the entire second floor. And I was convinced that V. Lind walked around high all the time because the the room that was in was right next to her classroom on the second floor.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, that was the very first sort of experience, and my first experience with, and I don't know that we called it the Chronicle then. We might have called it something else.
Something. I think it was something else then.
Yeah, but my very first thing, I was probably in seventh or eighth grade. No, maybe it was eighth grade, on Lindell, and I went down to Cardinal Ritter Institute, which used to have a nursing facility right there at Taylor, which was really half a block away from the school. And the conditions in there were so deplorable that I wrote an article about that. And I remember the school getting called because they didn't want the article to come out. And we were just this little scrappy kids doing news articles. Um, but that's my first sort of brush with what the paper was, which of course turned into the Chronicle, which was
And
the
and
school's news.
also it's worth pointing out that the building on Lindell we were renting from the archdiocese. So
So
pissing
probably
them off might have gotten us thrown out,
right, they might have had
but
some
we
influence
pestered
on
them
that.
quite a bit. Yep.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But so the school paper, I think, really became something more of a foundational thing in the new building. When the school opened up on DeBaliviere, um, I think then it became more of a formal, hey, let's do a school paper. And then that's when, if you remember Nordman Printing Company, we sat down with them and said, hey, how much would it cost to put this on newsprint, and do something more formal? And they, in the very first sort of thoughts of how we would do a paper, originally they were going to typeset the paper, and then there was this huge cost associated with that because we were going to have to take all of these articles that were handwritten because we didn't have computers, like, in that didn't that wasn't a thing, so you know so all these handwritten articles from students, and the complaint was they couldn't read anyone's writing. And so someone, I have no idea who, said, hey, why don't we get some machinery that can do this? And so the school invested in these two typesetting machines that from CompuGraphic, which were little squatty machines, kind of look like some kind of small little robot. And no one knew how to operate them. So we got these huge manuals that were, three-ring binders. And you can imagine, I mean, the teachers and you guys are all busy running a school. So, does anyone really have time to sit down and read through this manual? And just by happenstance, I happened to start reading it, and I guess I started picking up on, how to operate these damn things. And so I learned
And
how
let
to.
me
Yeah,
add one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah.
But with a typegraphing machine, um, and it had a screen, but if I'm not mistaken, it was one line high and 40 characters wide.
That's right. So it was literally just this little display screen with orange letters, and
Right.
you had to be careful because if you got too far, it would automatically return and print the line. And for those of you who aren't sure how that worked, so it was a photographic process. It would beam light through a film strip, and on the film strip were letters, individual letters, and so it would shoot light through there onto photographic paper, and we would then have to develop the paper. Oh, if times have changed. Like, oh my God. So that was so these little machines that we typed it, and the first version was you could only go on a strip that was this wide, and then we got a wider carriage that went in the machine that made it a little easier for us to do other stuff. But
Let me add one other thing. These
yeah,
machines were in the basement of the building. I'm not quite sure how we got them there, but the basement then was somewhat of a dungeon that was being energized by these two CompuGraphic machines. Now it's very nice, with classrooms. But for those who are, who have been in the school in recent years, it's a different basement.
slight little different version of that though. The first two machines were actually in the journalism classroom on the south wing of the building. And then when we got the
Okay.
bigger machine, so a year later, we were like, CompuGraphics said, "Hey, you can get a machine that's got a full screen, and you can actually see what you're doing and save it to a disk." Now, the floppy disk was, I mean, it was huge, you know. And that's when we moved it down to the basement. And in the basement, there was nothing else down there. In the first year, the second year, Charlie had a photo lab down there. So he started doing photography down there, and there was these weird cages, and the basement would always flood, so we always had to contend with that. But anyway, so the Chronicle, we kind of felt we were hard hitting reporters, and I remember, Catherine Park was an early editor, and I remember Monica and Catherine, and the day that John Lennon died, the night that he was shot, we were actually in paper production, and we literally redid the entire paper overnight, and took it to Norman like at 3 in the morning, and they printed it immediately. And the next morning we had it out, and it was that John Lennon had been shot, and that was a pretty big, we felt for some reason we had scooped the world, but we had to get the news out.
Yeah, but we could be the newspaper that would be the first print edition that anyone would see.
That's right. And,
A lot
there
of
was
people
not
didn't
social
subscribe to the
media.
book.
Yeah.
Right.
There wasn't social media. There wasn't this, we're going to tweet it out to everyone, or none of that existed. So it was, there was big stories that we always thought we were breaking news of the world. Um, that was our illusion, if you will. The Tylenol scare was a big headline of the paper, and then of course, we did other normal newspaper stuff that school papers have, the sports teams and those kinds of things. But for us, we took it very seriously, I think. And Albie and Mariana, who were Albie came from the Post Dispatch, and he was a copy editor. And so his big thing was writing accurate headlines and making all that work. And so we learned pretty quickly about those kinds of things: who, what, where, when, why, how, asking the right questions and getting the facts, those sorts of things, which a lot of that seems to have been dismissed upon by media of late. But it was interesting because the paper for us was really a great expression of kind of what was going on with the school at the time. So, controversies such as, should we have a smoking lounge? Should we allow students to go off campus? All those kinds of things were things that we took pretty seriously in terms of how the paper got put together.
And I can't remember whether the Skinker DeBaliviere Times was being published then, but we were really, in many ways, a neighborhood newspaper. I mean, there were terrific interviews that reporters did with Pantheon, which was the big development corporation on DeBaliviere at that time. And they would be very honest with us. And I think it got students more invested in the neighborhood where their school was.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first advertisers, and we debated taking advertising, but we started taking advertising, and first advertiser in the paper was actually Central West End Bank, which was at
Mhm.
the time Central West End Savings and Loan. But of course, Pantheon, they had a great relationship. So there was always, we were always getting, I remember Kathleen, the woman who ran that bank, was always sort
Queen
of
Hamilton.
sending
Yeah.
us, yeah, was always sending us tidbits of information from Pantheon that she wanted us to cover, as if we had any kind of influence over anything, but it felt good because we felt we did, and to
Mhm.
your point, the paper was distributed. Think of all the shops along Euclid. We distributed the paper. I mean, it wasn't just at the school. We widely distributed it. And in fact, that's one of the things that started to spearhead the paper drives we started to have, because we wanted to go and pick up the papers that hadn't been distributed. And so that led us to saying, oh, we could collect other paper and maybe we could recycle them.
We covered national stories. Um, we had sports stories. The scoop that Don Ingerson and Keith McElroy got
Yeah, for
in
Whitey
the interview
Herzog.
with Whitey Herzog
Yeah.
is really, really revealing.
Well, what's
Um,
interesting is he didn't
so
give a lot of
you were
he didn't give a lot of interviews. So that was a big
no,
deal. Like that was a big deal for the paper to be doing that story.
yeah, and somebody asked me, "Oh, how did we get the interview?" And I said, "Chutzpah." We had students with a faculty advisor who went down there to 200 Stadium Plaza and said, "Hey, these are students who would love to get an interview with Whitey Herzog. Is it possible?" And I think that whoever answered the door, they kind of melted at the idea of students coming there, and they got the white rat to do it. And sure
Right.
enough, it happened. And we really did feel that the metropolitan area was our lab, and we would go wherever there was news.
Well, and but that point too, though, is really part of what Crossroads was, which was the learning outside of the classrooms, learning by doing. I
Hmm.
think I mentioned to you before the biology field trips that were actually, we go out to the back lot and we would look for bugs. I mean, it really was experiential learning outside the walls of the classroom and learning by doing. And the paper was one example of hundreds where I think the school allowed us to learn by doing, and in a lot of ways allowed people to kind of experience where they might go later in life. I mean, I think about Kristen Smith, who was one of the first reporters. She had articles in the Chronicle, So I mean, you think about what was that influence. I don't know that she would point to that necessarily, but that's an example of kind of allowing people to sort of grow through experience and find their way.
Right, and Kristen became an anchor and a reporter, and
Yeah,
well, around the country, and now she's based in Richmond, Virginia,
yeah, that's right.
and working for the local county government as well. Um, so tell us about the Opinion magazine too.
Yeah, so I want to say one thing about the Chronicle, kind of to end that, button that part up. There was some controversy. We learned about censorship and freedom of the press because we
Mhm.
we had a story that we had gotten our hands on a memo that was written by a teacher saying here are some students that should receive more yellow slips than other students. And yellow slips was kind of a form of the administration's way of warning a student that their behavior was in question. That's the way. That's my interpretation. You can
Nicely
correct
put,
me.
yes.
You can correct me. Okay. And so we came across this memo that named the students that should be, for lack of a better term, targeted. I mean, that was the way we perceived it. Now that I'm sure there's a older way of looking at that, or a teacher way of looking at that's a little different, such as these might be students that need some guidance, and so therefore we're going to guide them. But so we found this memo, and then we started doing an investigation on it, and we had this whole story, and we so our paper always went through sort of a review process with the administration. That you always had to, the moderator teachers had to look at it and make sure what we were publishing was cool. So we made a fake paper. We made a paper that wasn't the real paper, and we created this other story that was a headline story, and boy, we got in a lot of trouble for that. And the administration, rightfully so, said, "Hey, we're not going to pay for the bullets that shoot ourselves with. This is, Furthermore, looking back as an adult now, I don't know that we gave the administration fair opportunity to respond because we were trying to keep it secret. So, so that in some ways it wasn't balanced journalism because we really weren't giving the other side probably properly. But we learned really quickly what censorship looked like, but that in itself was an interesting lesson that comes from all of that. And so it's interesting because I don't regret that experience because in some ways it taught us a lot about freedom of the press and those sorts of things.
And in retrospect, I would say that you had the memo, and that certain students were being targeted, and I think that's very newsworthy. I think where the names come out, that's where you
Yeah,
know
you're
um,
messing with privacy. Yeah, sure.
exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
but as kids, we're Scoop McScooperson.
right.
We're we're good. Woo, again, we're out conquering the world. But you all did that to us, like the model UNs and the mock legislature and the business and government class and all these sort of experiential learning and classes taught us to do that. Like, you so in some ways it was sort of a double-edged sword in some ways, because we're having to express those ways. So the Chronicle continued to survive. So it was shut down. My senior year, it was shut down halfway through the year, but then the following year it came back as the Chronicle.
I want to extend a deep apology to you though for
That's
that.
all good. No, no, it was good. It was fine.
However we did it, we really overreacted
Yeah.
and miss out on good brought in the second half of your senior year. It's a shame that we did that.
Yeah,
But
the bigger thing
we'll
is,
move on now.
yeah, yeah, the bigger thing is that, part of the history of Crossroads, right, is learning the fiber of what Crossroads was and is, and this is part of that. So I
Right.
I I
Mhm.
commend you and everyone that's putting this together for allowing us to tell the whole story. And I think that's pretty
Yep.
cool. So
Yep.
after the Chronicle continued, but then the current, well, I think the current was,
The current was what Pat Cohn did. That was the
yeah,
newsletter, which was,
that's
had
right.
feature stories.
That was
Um,
like the fundraising newsletter.
yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
then
But
the connection.
as PR rags go, I thought it was really good. I thought Pat Cohn and others did a great job.
Oh yeah,
I remember one about Ray Butler and his whole approach to sports. It was really insightful, and did stories about the Duff's dinner, things like that. So we were very fortunate to have her and
yeah.
others who did that work. And
We had this equipment, and so there was this time of, hey, we can let's publish, and this was again back in the days when we really didn't have computers. So we had all this great equipment that could turn out these publications. So I think that's what happened, and so as a result of that, it was a good way to educate and communicate with people. Again, there wasn't email, there wasn't social media, so how else does the school communicate these things out other than a Wednesday notice?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So I've got three things remaining here. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Opinion Magazine, the Block Party, and what you can say about what you're doing these days. So let's
Yeah.
go with opinion.
Okay. So, what do you want me to say about opinion? Because it's interesting because in my head, I've jumbled them all together, I think, in some ways.
Well,
Um,
I think with Opinion Magazine, what was interesting was that we had a good thing going by doing public opinion surveying
yeah.
in Clayton at
Let's
a
talk
time
about that. Yeah.
where it just turned out that by interviewing people, doing what's called internet polling, going up to people and asking them questions. In Clayton, we got a great cross section. And a lot of people might say, well, it's a business white collar area. How are you going to get a cross section? And it took a while to figure it out because we knew we were getting it. And so much of it had to do with people who were on jury duty
But
at the
didn't it
county
start?
courthouse.
But didn't it start? So I think it started. I want to say it started with the business and government class you were running, and it started with the Central West End Association wanting to do some kind of a survey on parking in the Central West End. That's what my vague recollection is. And
I
so,
don't know which came first, but I mean, if you want to talk about that survey, which
yeah,
was more looking at parking meters.
Yeah, but see, this was the start. This was the start of it, which is let's put a bunch of young folks. I say young folks, us. We were in high school and a few in junior high. Let's throw them out in the community and teach them how to walk up to strangers and ask questions. And the
Yep.
thing is, there's so much built into that learning because you're kind of teaching people how to be forward, how to talk, how to present themselves, how to introduce themselves, public speaking in a different way, really. And I think for a lot of us, that grounded a lot of us into being comfortable talking to people. I mean,
Right.
honestly,
And my recollection with the parking project was that we had a number of people and we were going around until 2 a.m. on either a Saturday or Sunday morning, every 15 minutes checking parking slots to see if
right,
the license plates changed so
right,
that we knew how rapidly there was a turnover of cars
that's
in the
right,
parking in the Central West End.
that's
And
right.
they were most appreciative of that.
Yeah, and I think, so taking kind of your love of politics, which I think has never ended, um, but your love of politics, which started with really mock legislatures and
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
those events, and then spun that into business and government class, and then the public opinion polling. And then we were starting to do political polling. So we were asking people, hey, who would you vote for? And the one race I remember was Harriet Woods was running against John Danforth, and we
Correct.
we we took it kind of personal because we had been to visit John Danforth, like we had been to Washington D.C. So this
Right.
was this was big for us, and so we did polling on who you're going to vote for and what's important to you in the election, and other pollsters really had the election going one way, and our results were dead on with the election. I mean, we were so dead on, and the news of that was pretty big. I mean, we ended up going on a couple TV shows. We went on KMOX radio, and it was a pretty big deal that these high school students determined or
And middle
predicted,
school students. And
and
middle
middle
school.
school students, yeah, had predicted the outcome of this big election, and it was pretty. I don't remember the actual results, but I
Well,
remember I
I can
remember
tell you,
that.
and we've got an opinion magazine with good graphing of it. But um, what happened was that Harriet Woods, the Democrat, was ahead slightly on the Friday before the election. And then on
Right,
the Monday, the day before the election, Danforth went ahead. And we were able to break the numbers down, among other things, by gender. And what happened was women fewer women participated in the poll. Fewer women said they would vote, and fewer women said they were for Harriet Woods. And it's like if you were a supporter of Harriet Woods and it was 4 o'clock that Monday afternoon, you'd be trying to yell out to the world, women, go out and vote, which is something, that clearly we're going to hear this year as well.
right, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think for us, the experience was really real because, I think oftentimes people go to school and they think, what difference are we really making? Like, how does this really apply to the real world? And we learned very quickly early on that our experiences at Crossroads those were real world experiences, whether it be the Chronicle having stories or whether it be the Harriet Woods Danforth race and how we were able to predict that outcome, or uh, the dozens of other things we did. I think about the block parties. Those were kind of started because we
So let's
wanted to raise.
transition into that. Let's
Yeah,
talk. I mean, because that's a remarkable thing, and
yeah. So
you put together such a team, and you had this vision, and um, we said, we went over. There were risks involved, and I think you did a lot of risk management. And
yeah.
so, tell us about it.
So yeah, so really was born out of the school, and I don't know that it does this still, but we would take annual trips at the end of the year, and each student was sort of empowered, needed to raise money to take themselves on this trip. The school didn't pay for it, so we had to raise money, and so we were always brainstorming how to do that. I remember Matt Kroll and I did a racquetball tournament that people could pay to go to, and it was bake sales, and we had I did a bike-a-thon, I think, and when I was in ninth grade in Forest Park, and so I think in my uh, freshman sophomore year, I said let's just throw a big party, a big block party, and no one knew what that was. I didn't know what it was when I said it. I don't think, um, but and at that point, the paper was going, so we had some contacts in the business community. And I remember going down to Kathleen at Central Western Bank and saying, I want to do this block party thing. And she had no clue what the hell I was talking about. But she said, sure, I can connect you with stuff. Interesting story. She put me in contact with Kim Tucci, who was owner of the Pasta House Company, and still, and he's no longer with us, of course. But I went to his office and I said, hey, we need money for this event. Will you sponsor it? And he said yes. Gave us $500, and that started for me a lifelong friendship with him. All the way up to his passing, and even his daughter. She and I still talk all the time and do events together.
Oh, wonderful! I did not know
that. What's really cool is Kathleen at the bank and Pantheon and Pasta House Company. A lot of these companies that were right in our area in our neighborhood gave us some money, and we threw a block party which had carnival rides and a stage, and we had our artists that perform music that performed there, but it was all student organized. So we kept track of all the students' hours, and that was kind of the big joke, because I think in the second year, you kept track of the hours, and you got paid based on the hours that you worked divided by the profit. And I think so many of us worked so many hours, it was $1.12 an hour is the rate.
Was that much? Okay.
Yeah, there was the rate that we were. I looked it up the other day. In fact, I got files here I was looking at the other day just to refresh my memory on it. But we raised money for people to go on the student trip. Did anyone make a lot of money? Probably not. But
I'll tell you what worried me the most.
Yeah.
were the rides.
The rides, the kids ride.
And safety. Yeah. I mean, my recollection is that they were almost held together with duct tape.
They were. No, they absolutely were. Duct tape and rope. No, they were. This is not a no. We looked at those rides and went, I don't know that that's a good idea.
Right.
But we still did it, and it was fun.
Worked.
Yeah, I think we even put you in a dunk tank, if I remember.
I think
correctly.
you did. I think you did. And for those who are more familiar with the school as it is now, where there's beautiful, green space out in front. Yeah. Back then, it was all basically asphalt.
Yeah, it was a paved parking lot, and that's where we put the block party. But It's interesting because so the block parties kind of spun me into, hey, I really like doing events. This is kind of cool. And I ended up getting a job at the radio station next door. My junior year, I was hired by the station, and I was just a scrappy person working in the newsroom, tearing off copy and editing it for the news reports. And by the end of my senior year, I was producing a radio show for them. And then I produced a music show that ended up becoming syndicated called the Quiet Storm, which, by the way, is still in existence today. Which is kind of cool. And I kept in touch with those people. It was more urban. It was urban contemporary, and at the time, so those may not know that right next to the school, in fact, the tower is still there, but there used to be a building there that was a radio station, which was Magic 108, and they were the #1 urban contemporary station in St. Louis for music. So you had on the AM side for talk, you had KMOX, and then music, you had Magic 108. And
the only thing that this past summer and fall, the radio tower that you're referring to, that's no longer there. It's been replaced by another one because the old one was apparently about ready to fall, and it could have fallen on the school. So we thank them for replacing it. Yeah,
that's probably a smart move.
This in many ways led into the work you've done, and
so I think before Crossroads, I mean, I was doing I was selling greeting cards door to door when I was young, and I was always doing some kind of entrepreneurial thing. But I think Crossroads really fostered for me the green light, which is go do it. Here's an idea I found. I'm going to give it to you because I found the original proposal I wrote for the block party, which was part of the business and government class, and I found that proposal that I wrote, which is real interesting. But the block party kind of gave me this desire to do more, and funny because the contacts from even the school led to me continuing my professional career. Eric Mink, who was a friend of Albie's, Albie, who ran the journalism class, had a column in the paper, and I met him through the school somehow. And his wife at the time, Claudia Mink, was very involved in nonprofit organizations. And she said, "Hey, will you help me with this Heart Association thing?" So I volunteered to help with American Heart Association walk, which was this was probably my senior year. And then after I graduated, she said, "Hey, I want to introduce you to this guy who's organizing Hands Across America." And I said, "Sure." And so they ended up hiring me to produce part of the Midwest segment for Hands Across America. And that led to me meeting Kathleen Turner and working for her. And then the Douglas family, Michael and Eric Douglas and Kirk Douglas, I worked for them coming from that, which led me to meet other people. So now I'm running a company that produces major events, which is what I do. And my specialty is large scale events with complex logistics. So, events
So
with
am
a
I
lot of
correct? This year
people.
is going to be your eighth Democratic National
This will be
Convention?
my eighth Democratic National Convention. My first one was in Atlanta in 1988. I handled communications for Jesse Jackson when he ran for president. And so for the DNC, I run something called the Fusion Center, which is a combination of all of the law enforcement agencies and entities that provide public services and safety to the convention. And I run that center. And this will be my eighth convention, which is I'm the longest running convention contractor other than the TV producer. He's been there a little longer than me.
That's terrific. And I would imagine that this year you're kind of on pins and needles with the Democratic Party going back to Chicago. The last time was there was 1968, and there
You
was
know,
what has come to be
it,
known as a
yeah,
police riot.
it's an
Um,
interesting time. I mean, my function is not political at all. It's purely logistics and safety and security. And of course, since 9/11, those things got amped up even more. But we're in a very volatile time right now. And freedom of speech is great, and people have the right to protest, which is wonderful. And we want to provide safe and secure ways for people to do that in a meaningful way. And that's part of the challenge that we have. And certainly the mandate is that people should be heard, and as long as it's done safely in an environment that doesn't put anyone at risk. So that's our challenge. I think that's the rub. That's where the rubber hits the road. And there are
right.
people who want to be nefarious, and there are people who want to cause disruption. We've had that at other conventions that have been of great concern. But yeah, it's interesting work, and I love it. I wouldn't change it for the world. I love what I
I'm
do,
very
and
glad
yeah,
you're going to be there. And I
yeah,
do want to ask, I think one of the things that, as best I know, is very dear to your heart is farm aid. And
yeah.
if you could talk a little bit about that, because so many people, in metropolitan areas don't know that much about it.
It's interesting because if you eat anything, any food, you have a stake in farming. I mean, you have a stake in America's family farmers, and in 1985, Willie Nelson was inspired by the Live Aid concert and said, "Hey, you know, why can't we do something for our farmers?" And I joined the organization a year later in 1987. So I've been doing farm aid since then in different roles, but now this is year 38 for me, I guess. Next year, Farm Aid will be celebrating its 40th year, and Willie's 91 years old, and this man still gets up and performs. And what's unique about Farm Aid is it's Willie Nelson, Neil Young, John Mellencamp, Dave Matthews, and Margot Price recently joined our board. And these are artists who run the organization. They don't just lend their name to it; they run the organization. But we're raising money, and we're a granting organization that supports and provides grants all across the country to farm related organizations, and everything from sustainability to climate change to where does our food come from to how to transition to organic and all those kinds of things, which are super important. But and we've even seen the food movement change dramatically in the years that Farm Aid has been around. We were talking about sustainability and climate change 15 years ago. I mean, and our festival that we do every year, we move around. We're in different places every fall, but our festival is 100% post consumer recycled. It's all the food is sourced from local sources and farmers at a fair wage with compostable and proper packaging. So they really walk the walk, as opposed to just sitting up on stage and playing great music. They really do good, and so I'm real proud to be involved with them and to be working with them for so long.
And,
It's
and
pretty
I'm so
pretty
glad that
amazing.
you are. And so
Yeah.
just one final, as you look back on the Crossroads years, uh, how do you see them and how do they play into what you've been able to do in the many years since?
It's a great question. I think for us, so junior high and high school are such formative years for people. And I don't know that you all and the teachers truly understood that at the time. Um, but you sure fostered a place where, if we water the seeds, they're going to grow. And if we let them grow and we give them sunlight, amazing things are going to happen. And, that's really what Crossroads is that it's was really learning outside learning outside the classroom. It was really learning by doing, experiential learning. When experiential learning wasn't even a phrase then. So I use it now loosely as if that's what we knew what was happening, and I don't think at the time we knew that what was happening.
I don't think we knew the term, and I think we were better off not knowing the term because we were just
I think
doing it
so.
on the fly and it
Yeah.
was natural.
I would say, I wish, I understand going to a college preparatory type way of learning and institutionalizing the learning, but there is something to be said for taking a look back across the history of Crossroads and saying, maybe we could do a couple classes that are a little different. And that would be the challenge I would give to people currently at Crossroads, which was maybe think about maybe we could do one or two things that nods to Crossroads 50 years ago when we allowed students to really do unique things. Because some of the zany ideas we came up with that the administration, you all teachers, greenlighted us to do would never happen today. I mean, I can't imagine anyone would let us go sleep on a parking garage, and pee in a bucket. I just don't see that, you know. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But
No, no,
all of
no.
those things in their entirety make up what Crossroads is and was, and it
Right.
molded us. It
And
molded
I,
us.
I, I just want to say, I mean, I think that Mark and Sarah, who are running the school now, are really connecting back to the way things used to be, and they're following their own guidelines, their own principles. I think they would be open to hearing from you and others who were part of, when we were getting started and we were doing really fun things that nobody else had thought of.
Yeah,
Uh,
what the school really should do, and this is my piece of advice now to the
yeah,
current administration, would be you all need to tap into your alumni. We're everywhere. We are in such great roles all across the world, doing amazing things, and that kind of collective experience can be shared with the current students and faculty in a way that could be really meaningful. And I think the school should work much harder at engaging the alumni to become involved in that process because that's what Crossroads Foundation was all about was experiential learning and learning by seeing and observing and doing. And I go back to seventh grade when we were on Lindell and the mock legislature debates we had, like for it was just amazing. It was just there's so many things there. I mean there's hundreds of examples of things that Crossroads did that is just seriously off the hook. Yeah.
Dennis, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I love going down memory lane, and I hope between the two of us and many others, we can create more new memories, which are just as exciting as what we've been doing up to now.